Oh, hello one, hello all. It's the gothiest ghost of them all, Casper in the flesh. It's time for a review of Mount Eerie, Night Palace. Mount Eerie is a folk project constructed by legendary singer-songwriter Phil Elverum, who is also a multi-instrumentalist, also a producer, with a brand new LP. And I know I'm late to the party. I do this a lot. I have another job. I know, but if I get more subs, if I get more likes, what have you, we can get the ball rolling and this could be my permanent job. But after this, I got one more review to do. Then there's a list week. And then we're good. We're good. But let's get into it. With me being such a fan of Phil and his work, I definitely had to touch on this. I definitely had to review it because it's certainly been years since I've heard something from him. The last project he dropped, which really had an impact on me and an impact on a lot of people, was his record A Crow Looked at Me, which was devastatingly crushing, depressing, for obvious reasons if you've listened to it, which is somewhat the case, which is an album that's also referenced on this LP. And I feel it's important I say he has been at this for a long time, a massive amount of time. Going under the pseudonym at first, The Microphones, dropping a handful of great records in that catalog, such as It Was Hot, We Stayed in Water, my personal favorite, the absolutely robust, beautiful, epic The Glow Part 2, and after albums would stop dropping under the Microphones name, he would eventually shift to Mount Eerie, which the last Microphones album was Mount Eerie, which would lead up to some great LPs under that name, such as Lost Wisdom, Wind's Poem, A Crow Looked at Me, which honestly, being made under vast, tragic circumstance, I could see an album not being for everyone, including me at the time. It was a little too... It was too depressive for me to grab onto, but once I listened to it, once I understood it, I was incredibly moved by it, and it's honestly an album that's hard to go back to based off of the passing of his wife and the mother of his child. But in retrospect, the album is a meditation on death. It's a meditation on accepting the passing of somebody, or death in general. So it's a moving and very powerful record. If you're new to Phil, if you're new to his work, you can get folk music, experimental, you could also get some slacker rock in here. Just different styles that could range from noisy to very gentle to warm. There's also a lot of lo-fi recordings on here that keep that dark quality. But just because they're dark does not mean they're not cathartic or beautiful. And Phil has worked in this magic through the course of his career. You're gonna get something folky, you're gonna get something deep, you're gonna get something meaningful. When it comes to the lyrics, when it comes to even the production. And if you're looking for a record to be perfect in the traditional sense, I'm sorry, you're not going to find that here. But what you are going to get is something beautiful, something raw, something from the heart, something haunting, something moving, something intricate, something that says something. And this is a long record. This is an hour and 20 minutes, close to an hour and 30 minutes, just a little shy of that. So let me just get into the track list here. The song Breaths has these drones, these environmental noises, but this track is engulfed in a lot of hazy feedback that, to me, really feels like they're taking it back to The Glow Part 2, when they were under the name The Microphones. And it has these thunderous, distorted drums with pieces of acoustic guitar, but it feels like it's being slammed on the track. And mostly has a lot of focus on the percussive aspect. I love how close and dreary and airy his vocals are here. Lyrically speaking on the breaths, the air. But this mostly feels like the inner workings of him, and throughout this album, it's not really too much of a stretch to see that you are seeing what's in Phil's heart. You're seeing what he's thinking, and he's really putting that out there. Like, I'm gonna get to this again, but you're gonna notice certain steps of this album, certain layers of this album, certain chapters of this album, where in this track in general, you are getting the experiences he's had, going into the deep, dark realms of that. And lyrically, Phil has mostly used elements of the earth to correlate to his experiences, to his feelings, to describe something, to bring these themes together to create some type of message, such as the wind, the fog, rain, and sun, which correlates to different stories, different thought patterns that Phil is portraying here, that he's spilling out to you. And after being a long-time Phil Elverum fan, this is certainly expected. But again, he always finds meaning, he always finds ways to bolster these with a story. And this really shows a perfect example of Phil's artistry, and how vastly creative he uses this, and how he's vastly creative, deeply poetic, very meaningful, while again using nature and life's experiences. And he uses these experiences to create these stories, and also the meanings behind them. And here he's speaking on the snow, he's speaking on the cold, the wind, and with how dark this track sounds, it somewhat does sound stormy, and really leaves an opening for the following track to be geniusly sequenced. And though Phil does seem calm here, and also defeated, it feels like something is about to snap. And it certainly does on the following track, Swallowed Alive, which is easily the most chaotic, animalistic track here, which from the following track transitions fantastically into these wailing, barbaric screams that honestly sound like the most freezing and harshest winds you could probably encounter. And while this track isn't long, it still has a place in the track list. It still has meaning, and I believe the child speaking at the end of this is Phil's daughter, that's speaking on the end of the track. You get swallowed alive by the lion, you live to tell the tale, which is vastly esoteric, but I feel plays a big role in the record. And we get the following track, Canopy, which is a beautiful song dedicated to his daughter, that has these tenderly strummed guitar leads, and features these vastly large cymbals crashing into each other. But they're crashing together gently. It has these very heartwarming lyrics. That is short, but very sweet, as he's endearingly telling her that she's the inspiration to him, how undying and limitless his love is for her, how she gets him through the darkest times. It's moments like this where I feel Phil is one of those writers, he's one of those musicians where he doesn't really need a lot to get his point across. He doesn't need a lot to get his emotions out. Like, he could get it done in a short span of time. And that's not to begrudge anyone who does the long ballads, it's not what I'm doing. But I feel he has the homespun, genuine charm to pull it off. And on the song Broom of the Wind, Phil brings another change of pace. The vocals are more upfront, they definitely have more clarity to them, as we get these smooth guitar embellishments that sound very slacker rock, but with these beautiful horns, it seems to me like it comes off very Silver Jews, as it has like a familiar guitar line to it that sounds very smooth but very refreshing and intoxicating in a way. And it has a lot of thick bass coalescing with it. And then we get the super warm horns that has some very airy distortion to them. They're breathy, they're done amateurly, sure, but it's with that I'm saying that Phil knows how to bring beauty in imperfection. He does that a lot. He's been doing that throughout his entire career. So while it does sound airy, it does sound amateurish, there's a beauty to it, there's a rawness to it, there's a human touch to it. And Phil has always been a master at that. The song I Walk, probably the most ghostly tune on here. There's something very otherworldly going on here. Maybe one of the best combinations of messy and emotionally moving at the same time. While it does sound chaotic, there's still cohesion here. And there's also moments here where Phil does go kind of black metal in a way, with the absolutely fiery, hellish tremolo pick guitars on The Wind and the Fog, the first of the series. However, I do find myself enamored more with the latter. That's very drony, almost pulsating, with a very somber guitar line, with these hypnotic strings that pop up here and there, and become more prominent as the track continues. And Phil really delivers some deep, and I mean deep as in volume, and depressive vocals here that sound almost Leonard Cohen-like, as the lyrics here come off very mournful, as if he's speaking to someone who's passed. I'm not quite sure. And the more I listen to it, I'm like, is he speaking to someone of the living? Is he speaking to someone of the dead? Is he speaking to someone at all? Because this is another example of his esoteric poeticism. But I can tell it's coming from a place of pessimism. I'm very sure of that. Like, mostly of what I can see and hear of the destruction of something mostly coming from the destruction of something that him and this person built, the possibility of life and the wind dismantling it and tearing it apart. And then shares more symbolism of being committed to the wind, which I would assume is being accepting of what's to come, being accepting of the destruction of plans, of life, of this burden. But then speaking on cupping the candle, and maybe the candle is hope, and maybe the person he's speaking to is living, and he's speaking on protecting them. There's just so much lyricism to Phil. There's so much to Phil's lyricism, how much layers are put into what he says. As he's letting us know, he's letting us in on these events and these feelings he's having from these events. But what makes it interesting to me is the unraveling, the decoding. But at the same time, as I'm decoding, I could also sympathize with what he's saying. I mean, sometimes pretty blunt, but there are times where even if I didn't catch the first thing, I could still sympathize with what the first message I caught was. And I love the acoustics here that provides these beautiful, dreamy call and response vocals that are syncopated beautifully as Phil reflects on the tumultuous aspects of nature, such as the wind moving things, meaning natural causes causing destruction, which would also explain for the title of this track, Blurred Vision, as Phil is speaking on his eyesight worsening, the efficacy of his prescription declining, and with the song being called Blurred World, I feel it's him getting lost in the world, trying to get a grip on the changes, and how the world feels obscured to him, the vision of the world feels obscured to him. Also, I love the melodic drones here that are very linear, very thick, and feel somewhat sunburnt. There's more beautiful layering. There's more beautiful vocal layering on the absolutely gorgeous pianos on the track on I Heard Whales, I think. That this time I feel like I'm really hearing Heavy Rain recorded here, which I'm sure of due to the fact that this album does feature field recordings. And with how distorted and how much of a downpour that I'm receiving here, I truly and honestly think they are capturing rain here, that Phil has captured rain here, that he's really gone out and captured the sound of rain. Because it just sounds too real, especially with the crackles going on here, and the feedback and the ocean sounds. And honestly, I feel like this track does fuck with your head a bit, because it does give you the idea that you are probably hearing whales. But then Phil is lyrically introducing other possibilities. Maybe science, maybe a shipwreck, maybe something unexplainable. And while this could be something unexplainable, it's definitely something relatable as well, as we experience things that we're not even sure are what to be explained, what we can make out of certain situations that we've experienced, what we've heard, what we've seen, where we as humans hear something, we see something, and try to come up with an interpretation, a conclusion, and possibilities of what it could be. And I feel like this part of the album takes on consistencies of wildlife. With the following track, I Saw Another Bird, which, given how Phil does do these reoccurring themes throughout his discography on the album, this is certainly one of them, referencing to that tumultuous project I referred to earlier, Crow Looked at Me. But what I feel Phil is speaking on is this being a mere coincidence, seeing how the bird wasn't necessarily the effect of the obviously traumatic experience he had, but simultaneously avoiding them at the same time. And I love the thick driving guitar lines here, his melodic hums, and how they intensify, how they become more cohesive as the track develops. And the song I Spoke with a Fish is another track here that has these gorgeous guitar melodies, but also a sudden flurry of trap drums and vocoder vocals. But while this does have the epic moments here, true displays of beautiful intricacies, along with these gargantuan walls of harmonies, that I just can't help but feel like in awe of. But also what I should speak on too is the message here, the scenario, where he's speaking to the fish, and this fish not seeing the water as a palace, and how this track is to bring environmental awareness, such as the conditioning of the water, not using animals as an exhibition. There's also a humorous moment here at the end of this that I'm sure any Coen brother fan would appreciate, me being one of them. And we do get a shift of pace, a shift of thematic pace with the track non-metaphorical decolonization, not only from a sonic perspective, but thematically too, with some really thick drones, bright searing organs, intense distorted drum fills, and faintly I can hear a vocal melody from Phil. And after we get this serene break, we also get into Phil speaking on this country's horrid colonization and racist history, and how it still stains this land today, and how there are people who are too chicken shit to acknowledge it, such as the enslavement of the indigenous people, how they're still being murdered today, how it was savagely stolen from them, and how in order to progress, in order to make things better, we need to speak on these atrocities, destroy these racial patterns that were brought on through history, that these colonizers has casted across the land, and bring forth a new way for everyone, right the wrongs of those in the past, recognize privilege and speak on it, and give them their land back. And we have November Rain, which sounds to me as dueling acoustic guitars here that sound amazingly clustered and again dirty, then creates this amazingly abrupt, loud burst of guitars. And this song here, he's speaking on homelessness, but he's portraying the lyrics in a tone of sarcasm. They're very poetic. The delivery sounds gentle, but the lyrics are very critically addressing the homeless situation we have here, with this big tragic atrocity of, yes, homelessness, with people living in cars, freezing and harsh cold winter. In a way, this does kind of sound like the folk version of that Chat Pile track, Why, and how we have these empty homes people could live in, and also speaking on how this whole anti-squatting bullshit needs to end, where you have these empty homes, and speaking on how this land is colonized to begin with, it's not our land to begin with, and how this land is stolen, built on pillaging. So since there's no ownership, who are we to say who could stay where, who could be a resident of where, who could live here, who can't? And yes, Phil geniusly goes through these sections of the record, with a series of tracks assembled very thematically. The song Co-Owner of Trees, which has these super bright organ drones, crashing cymbals. It's very Velvet Underground. But Phil, again, puts his own twist on it. And one of the longest tracks here at 6 minutes. And continuing the thematic focus on colonization, how we own nothing and we're destroying this land we don't own. And given how nature plays a huge role in Phil's music, I feel once again he's using these nature elements. He's using them to say something. And this time it's used in a political stance, which honestly I think is really badass. And the song The Sun has these ominous grouped hums over these crashing cymbals, bits of guitar that are very distorted. And thematically I feel he shares a meditation here. A meditation on not knowing what came before, but rolling with it anyway. Like how he humorously adds and references his niece wearing a Nevermind t-shirt from Nirvana. And then there's writing poems, which honestly Phil strikes again with the depth of his lyricism, his philosophical lyrics, and saying pretty much in a nutshell how with these vast arrays of events, meanings, philosophies, vast amounts of nature, injustices, that there's only so much you could write with a poem, which couldn't be any more true. And honestly, I feel if an artist is delivering the message, speaking on it, it is something I want to happen, but not something they have to do. But I feel like when an artist does speak on atrocities going on in the world, injustices, all I want from them is the right message, quality music, and something I could feel. And I feel Phil does have the components to make these points land. Now, the Gleam Part 3, which is a third installment of the ongoing song series that is in the Phil Elverum catalog, mostly under the Microphones name. The first one being very heavy, very hulking. The second one sounding like a funeral march. And this one has more qualities to it than its predecessor, more additions to it. It's more radiant instrumentally, along with its hulking, melancholic feel, and topically Phil is bringing some esoteric turmoil. It's certainly one of my favorite tracks on the record, but I'm not sure if I think it's greater than the second, but still a great installment in the catalog. The next track, Stone Woman Gives Birth, I wouldn't say it's a terrible track, but I feel it's the weakest one here. But I do kind of appreciate the almost dancey aspect. I do wish the percussion though didn't sound so tacked on, and Phil's vocals weren't as subdued. And that's one thing too, I feel like with the weaker tracks here, they're not terrible tracks, but I don't think they hold as much weight or as much water as the highlights here. But I don't really think I found a track that was just all out terrible. And there's a 12-minute spoken word piece where he dives into the topical focuses here that have been addressed on this album again and again and again. And honestly, I do feel a lot of these points are valid. They do have a place on the album, but as a song, as a track, it's probably something I'm not gonna necessarily return to. But again, I do think it has an important place on the album. And then we have the final track, I Need New Eyes, as he speaks on impermanence, being the state of fact of living, but for a limited time, a limited amount of time, which is rooted in Buddhism, which I believe Phil practices. I believe he's a Buddhist. And with Phil's mentality, everything he's said on this record, everything he's been through, everything the world has been through, it's like he's finding himself in this small window of time, which is something I could totally identify with, but also getting older, experiencing a lot, trying to avoid the pressure, everything crumbling around him from climate change, historical catastrophes, racism, losing loved ones. Wishing he hadn't seen all this. And also there's moments here where he's in denial of what is going on and how he doesn't want to live with these experiences. And saying in the ending he needs new eyes, I guess another experience, I guess a second look, I guess an escape, I suppose, a do-over. That has these cavernous hums syncopating with these droning hums that eventually give way to these acoustic strums, to distorted guitar lines, heavy crushing drums. It sounds very dramatic, while also very still, but it's also very haunting, and a very haunting end to the record. But honestly, that's Phil's style. So yeah, that's pretty much the record. It's honestly another great installment in the Mount Eerie catalog, in the Phil Elverum catalog. I thought the writing was really great. I thought the thematic tie-ins were fantastic. Were there tracks here that could have been left on the cutting room floor? Sure. But overall, I feel Phil definitely is more experimental here. He's definitely brought new ideas here, speaking on new messages. And I think it's really paid off. I think we've gotten another experimental album with a lot of depth to it, and something singer-songwriter fans, rock fans should really check out. I know the vocals are kind of subdued at times. I know they're a little quiet. I know it's messy, but that is the beauty, the rawness, and the realness of Phil's work. That's the tangibility of it. So if you're not into that, I get it. But give this thing a chance. I know it's long. It's a long album. It's almost an hour and a half, so I get it. But please check it out. Man. So great job, Phil. I'm feeling a 4 out of 5 Black Hearts on this album. If you've given this a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? I am Caspa. I am your plug. Hit me with a sub. Show me love. Hit me with a comment, even if it's some nonsense. Got one more review left. Hope you love it. Because I'm loving this record so far. And I'm loving this one too. This one. Caspa, Mount Eerie. Till we meet again.